Welcome to the Practical NLP podcast with me, Andy Smith. This week, metaphors. One more thing that you will sometimes see included in the Milton model, but really deserves a whole section to itself, is metaphor. If you had to get the real essence of what metaphor is about, it's understanding and experiencing one thing in terms of another. This is tremendously important. Some psychologists believe that metaphor is fundamental to the way we think and express ourselves. We use metaphors all the time when we speak, mostly without noticing them. If someone says their relationship has hit a rocky patch, they're using a metaphor where the relationship is like a vehicle that they're both traveling in, and the difficulties are like a rough bit of road. When we talk about someone blowing their top, that's a metaphor that says anger is like some kind of hot liquid, maybe molten lava, so the person is like a volcano. If you're looking forward to something, you're using a spatial metaphor for time, maybe as a road that you're traveling along, or maybe you experience time as more like standing by a road, and events are vehicles on the road moving towards you, as in New Year is nearly upon us. Back in the section on rapport, which, by the way, you should still be practicing every opportunity you get, we briefly mentioned listening to the metaphors that people use, which can tell you a lot about how they're thinking, and matching those metaphors is another way of building rapport. That's one way of using metaphors. Milton Erickson had another way of using them. He would use stories to help his clients find resources within themselves, to bring about state changes, to help install new coping strategies, or to make a particular learning point for his students. They could be real-life stories from his life experience, from some hobby or interest of the client, stories of how other clients had solved problems, or drawn from myths or folk tales or references to stories that the client was already familiar with from the Bible or even TV or Hollywood. So what was Erickson doing? He noticed the patterns in the client's situation. Metaphors are understanding and experiencing a thing or a feeling or a situation in terms of something else that's analogous. The internal logic of the metaphor sets limits on what we expect to happen, and on the choices the person sees in that situation. So if someone feels they've painted themselves into a corner, just stopping and walking out of there won't seem like a valid option to them. Even if in real life that choice is available, they won't feel able to do it, because they're experiencing the situation in terms of the metaphor as much as they are in terms of their sensory experience. One reason that metaphors are so powerful is that we can use them to talk about things that are hard to express in any other way, things in our lives that are mysterious, intangible, loaded with meaning, in a short, vivid, compact analogy drawn from our concrete experience. As long as the relationships in the metaphor are analogous, we don't have to describe the real situation in detail. We can work out the rest of the information from the metaphor. So metaphors can carry a huge amount of information about what an experience is like in a few words. So you can use metaphors for understanding other people better and strengthening rapport with them. You can use them, as Erickson did, as a way of activating a person's unconscious resources and giving them new choices. And you can also use them for describing a complex issue in a few words, or an image that sticks in people's minds, getting people to see something in a different way, or in a presentation, leading your audience through a series of emotions from where they start out to where you want them to end up. Would that be a useful item to have in your leadership toolbox? Here's how you can create metaphors quickly and easily. The basic steps to generate a metaphor for helping someone to resolve a problem or have more choices are as follows. Firstly, identify the present situation or issue and the desired state or outcome. So in terms of present state and desired state, we want to move from a complex issue, hard to understand, to a simple image that everyone can make sense of and remember. From problem to solution, from an unhelpful emotion in an audience, for example, suspicion, to a helpful emotion, for example, curiosity, and most of all when helping people, from no choices to choices available. So in the actual situation, notice the significant people, places, and things, and the relationships between them. Keeping the desired state in mind, chunk up from the present state to a category. What is this situation or issue an example of? And then chunk down again from there. What is another example of this category of situation or issue that includes the possibility of ending up in the desired state? Find analogies for the significant people, places, things in the situation and for the relationships between them. In the jargon, the metaphor should be isomorphic with the real situation. Isomorphic from the Greek meaning the same shape as. In other words, the structure of the relationship between the elements in the metaphor and the logic of the whole thing should be the same as in the real situation, even though the content might be quite different. For example, I heard John Grinder use the example of coaching a business owner who is engaged in a dispute with a former business partner over the ownership of a business. All of the business guy's energy is going into the dispute, and he's neglecting all sorts of other opportunities that would actually make him more money. So in Grinder's example, you might use a story about two hummingbirds fighting over a flower while taking no notice of all the other flowers around them. Notice that you don't resolve the story for them. You don't talk about the two hummingbirds making up, or one of them flying away and getting loads more nectar from the other flowers. The possibilities are there, and you leave it to the person's unconscious mind to find the best possibilities for them, which may include some choice, action, or idea that you hadn't even thought of. Also, keep the elements in the story relevant. One of the business people might be married, but unless the spouse was also a significant player in the situation, you wouldn't want to start talking about one of the hummingbirds sharing a nest. Ideally, the metaphor will appeal to the values or interests of the listener to keep them engaged. So the hummingbird metaphor will work best with someone who's interested in ornithology or who's looking forward to a tropical holiday. So once you've got your story, tell the story, or mention the metaphor if it's a short one, and notice the response you get. You can anchor problem states and resources within the story using voice tone, facial expression, or even touch. Memorable images from within the story can become anchors for resources. Where you're just coming up with a metaphor to help someone understand a complex situation rather than for coaching or therapy purposes, you can simplify this process a bit. Just ask yourself, what is this situation like? This question leads you to chunk sideways. Your unconscious mind will handle the chunking up and chunking down to another example steps, and you will know if you have a good example, if it feels right. Metaphors don't have to be long-winded. As little as one word in the right place may evoke a symbol with a wealth of meaning attached. Because of the impact of psychological priming, you're usually going to want to keep the internal representations positive to elicit positive states in the listener. This is also worth bearing in mind when you use Milton model suggestions. Finally, before you use your metaphor on an audience, especially in a set-piece presentation or speech, put yourself in the shoes of the audience and listen to it from their point of view. Is there any other way that it could be taken? This will help you to avoid unintended reactions and unexpected laughs. That's it for this week's podcast. In the meantime, move that bit closer to a golden future by visiting nlpwebstore.com and grabbing the free downloads, or subscribe to the Coaching Leaders newsletter at coachingleaders.co.uk. See you next time.